it.
Oops. Oh, I dropped the phone. Ow. My finger. Please. Oh, I'm sorry. Not making any money. YouTube. What am I saying? I'm saying it. Yeah, okay. I love you, YouTube. Nothing. Protocol. No copyrights. YouTube. Fair use. I don't know why I'm saying that. I'm supposed to give you this news. Scott Morris, anything error. Scott Morris, anything error. It was error. Everything you're hearing is error. They need to take it to court. They're going to court. Oh, the error. What's the error? Out there. Love you, out there. So they're talking about how do we do it? Kevin Rudd. They're talking about Scott Morris. Tingo, Laura Tingo on Scott Morris in Reset Future. Doesn't go any further. Anyway, Laura Tingo on Scott Morris Reset Future. Anything poof. Fuck you. Ha. Love you. Scott Morris. Out there. To court. To love. Everything.
They're all very worthy things, but we haven't really heard much about it from this Prime Minister. So it was quite odd.
Today I want to conclude, though, by announcing how we are going to take our modern manufacturing strategy to the next level. First, instigated by Karen Andrews, who's with us here today as Minister for Home Affairs.
There were all these big questions and the Prime Minister didn't seem to be answering them.
Then, of course, we get to journalists' time to ask questions. You had one of your own and, I mean, it was pretty clear he didn't really like it.
I essentially said to him, well, it's the start of a new year. Let's clear the air. Would you like to apologise for the failures in your Prime Ministership? I want to take this opportunity to actually say sorry for the mistakes you've made as Prime Minister.
Well, thanks for the question.
He can't say sorry. He was saying, I've already said I regret that things haven't worked out and there's my share of mistakes.
We're all terribly sorry for what this pandemic has done to the world and to this country.
The comparison I always think about this was at the height of the sort of disaster of the first year of COVID in Victoria. I remember Dan Andrews had done a press conference where people kept on saying, well, who's responsible? And he essentially said, look, ultimately I am responsible. If you want to blame somebody for it going wrong in the hospitals, blame me. Don't blame the poor staff and nurses. Now, I think they all respected the fact that he wasn't running away from it.
You said, he can't say sorry. I mean, why can't he say sorry?
This is an aspect of the Prime Minister that's just become, really obvious. All of those sort of cliches that both the opposition and commentators make, that he doesn't hold the hose, out of his own mouth, that, if there's a problem, it's always somebody else's mistake. It's the states that have done something wrong. And even his language on the day where he was saying, I'll take responsibility for my share of the problems. He is ultimately, as my colleague Nikki Sava wrote in a column this week, he is the one who's ultimately got to take responsibility for this and fix it in the minds of voters. And this occurred on the same day that Boris Johnson had gone into Parliament after the debacle over there about the parties at 10 Downing Street and said sorry. Now, it's not that hard.
There were also other quite prickly questions, weren't there? One was about a leaked text message between the former New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian and an unnamed member of the Prime Minister's cabinet. That came from Channel 10's Peter Van Onselen.
I've got them right here. In one, she describes you as, quote, a horrible, horrible person, going on to say she did not trust you and you're more concerned with politics than people. The minister is even more scathing, describing you as a fraud and, quote, a complete psycho.
How did he handle those in your view?
He was really, really rattled.
Does this exchange surprise you? And what do you think it tells us?
Well, I don't know who you're referring to or the basis of what you've put to me. But I obviously don't agree with it, and I don't think that's my record.
It's a pretty hard thing to deal with because basically the accusation is that, you know, some unnamed person had this conversation with the text message exchange with Gladys Berejiklian. He didn't know who it was. He didn't know what the circumstances of it were. And it's a bit hard to work out how you respond to something when there's so little information. But I suppose the thing that strikes me about the Prime Minister and a lot of the senior ministers and a lot of the senior officials at the moment is that they're just exhausted. And I'm not saying that as an excuse or anything else. I'm just saying I think that's the way it comes across. They can't actually think very far in advance. You know, they're just hoping that everything gets better. And I think this came across in a lot of the answers to questions. The Prime Minister, once again, would just sort of be almost randomly throwing out, you know, if you asked him an aged care question, he'd sort of be randomly throwing out talking points, but not actually engaging in, you know, the verb that was implicit in the question.
Right, so you've told us that the press club address didn't go particularly well. It wasn't targeted enough. It was talking too much about the big picture. It didn't address the concerns, the immediate concerns Australians have, and he wouldn't say sorry. So none of that went particularly well. Let's fast forward, Laura, to next week because Parliament is back then. It's sitting for 10 days until the end of March. How important are those 10 days going to be for Scott Morrison?
It's basically looking like an absolutely terrible fortnight for the Prime Minister if he's trying to recapture his authority within the party and sort of set the agenda for the government and use the Parliament as a platform. It's actually quite a dangerous fortnight, I think, for Scott Morrison, because over the summer other things have happened, like the fact that Sam McMahon, the senator from the Northern Territory, has resigned from the Country Liberal Party, and you know the sort of sense of fraying around the edges of the government and its numbers is very high. He's got George Christensen to deal with as well. It's all really unattractive.
So it's sort of the 10 days he doesn't really need.
That's right. His only other platform really is the budget, which is at the end of March, the 29th of March. And he'll just be hoping like mad that Omicron does decline, that there isn't something worse about to happen, that the rage subsides, the economy improves, and he gets a bit more air going into the budget, and that will give him an opportunity to reframe himself again.
Laura Tingle is the chief political correspondent with 730. Scott Morrison can call an election in the first quarter of this year, but it's widely thought he'll wait and go to the polls in May to give himself more time to rebuild support. This episode was produced...
I cut it. Oh, bro. Bam, 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 bam. Pew, 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 pew. Bam, 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 bam. Pew, 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 pew. Bam, 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 bam. Pew, 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 pew. Pew, pew. Pew, 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 pew. Where is it? What you do? All you do? What you do? What you do? All right. You do what you gotta do, what you got to get to do whatever it is that you need to do. You're poor people. You're poor. Need money. You poor. Do us. You poor. You can do what you got to do with the poor. Hey, yo. Poor.
ABC News.
ABC News with Satyam Weinstein.
The Deputy Nationals leader David Littleproud is weighing into the debate over the Prime Minister's character, arguing he's a fair and honest operator. The Nationals leader, Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce, has been forced to apologise after a text he wrote as a backbencher in March last year was made public. In the text, Mr Joyce labelled the Prime Minister a liar and a hypocrite. Mr Littleproud says Mr Joyce's views have since changed. More than 100 firefighters are battling.
ABC News.
ABC News with Satyam Weinstein. The Deputy Nationals leader David Littleproud is weighing into the debate over the Prime Minister's character, arguing he's a fair and honest operator. The Nationals leader, Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce, has been forced to apologise after a text he wrote as a backbencher in March last year was made public. In the text, Mr Joyce labelled the Prime Minister a liar and a hypocrite. Mr Littleproud says Mr Joyce's views have since changed. More than 100 firefighters are battling a bushfire that's threatening lives and homes on WA's south coast, and emergency warnings in place for parts of Shadforth, William Bay, Scottsdale, Perryville, Ocean Beach, Kentdale and Cordobup in the Shire of Denmark. The blaze is out of control and unpredictable. 18 people with COVID have died in New South Wales, with the number of new cases dropping. For the 24 hours to 8 o'clock last night, COVID hospitalisations remained steady at 2,337. 152 people are in intensive care, and there were 8,389 new cases, down on the figure of just over 10,000 from yesterday. And former Socceroo Craig Foster says he's highlighting the plight of asylum seekers by locking himself inside of a cage outside the Melbourne facility which held tennis champion Novak Djokovic. Mr Foster joined a group of protesters who are spending time in cages outside the Park Hotel. ABC News.
ABC News.
Sonia Feng with the latest news headlines. The Department of Emergency Services is urging residents in parts of WA's south to remain vigilant as two out-of-control bushfires continue to threaten lives and homes. On Saturday, Bridgetown residents as well as patients and staff at the hospital were evacuated to the nearby town of Manjimup. People in Denmark are being urged to leave now for a safer place. Joy has turned to despair in Morocco, where a 5-year-old boy has died after being trapped 30 metres down a well since Tuesday. Morocco's royal palace announced that the child named Ryan had not survived, despite a camera lowered into the hole 2 days earlier showing that he was still alive.
ABC News.
ABC News with Satyam Weinstein. Authorities in WA say firefighters are battling extreme fire behaviour. 3 major bushfires are burning in the state. A fire near Denmark in the Great Southern regions destroyed a number of homes, while a blaze at Bridgetown in the southwest has also destroyed buildings and left 1 man critically injured. Authorities say a fire near Bruce Rock in the eastern wheat belt's grown to 30,000 hectares and is threatening the town of Corrigan. An 18-year-old woman's been attacked by a shark at kelp beds east of Esperance on WA's south coast. The incident was reported just before midday WA time. It's understood the woman's friends took her to Esperance Hospital, but the extent of her injuries are unknown. The Royal Flying Doctor Service has confirmed it transported a patient to Perth from Esperance. The Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development says it's working with local authorities.
ABC News.
Andrew Kalupas with the latest. Firefighters in Western Australia are concerned about a third bushfire in the state, which is out of control and unpredictable. 2 other emergency-level fires have destroyed homes in the southwest and Great Southern regions. Authorities say a fire near Bruce Rock in the eastern wheat belt has grown to around 30,000 hectares and is threatening the town of Corrigan. A man's been critically injured while trying to defend his property at Bridgetown, south of Perth. The fire there has burned around 2,500 hectares, is now contained but not controlled. US officials have warned that a Russian invasion of Ukraine could cause as many as 50,000 civilian deaths. They've also estimated that an attack could see the Ukraine capital Kiev fall within days and prompt a refugee crisis in Europe as millions of people flee. The US officials estimate Russia has assembled about 70% of the military capability needed for a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in coming weeks. The ground is expected to freeze and harden from mid-February, enabling Moscow to bring in more heavy equipment. Russia is said to have more than 100,000 troops near Ukraine's borders, but denies planning an attack. Passengers and crew on a boutique cruise ship that arrived in Hobart are in isolation after a passenger tested positive for COVID-19. The passenger tested positive on the last day of the 10-day cruise and is experiencing mild symptoms. Passengers and crew are isolating in a quarantine hotel for 7 days as close contacts. The cruise did not leave Tasmanian waters. The New South Wales government says vouchers are being rolled out on Monday for parents to spend on accommodation. Parents of children enrolled in school will get 5 vouchers totalling $250 for use at hotels, motels and other accommodation. Everyone else will receive a $50 stay voucher as the government seeks to revive the pandemic-hit tourism sector. ABC News.
استمعوا الآن إلى الموسم الثاني من بودكاست أستراليا بالعربي. أحدث إصدارات SBS عربي 24 يأخذكم في رحلة استقرار بعض المهاجرين العرب ويشارككم بأبرز الصدمات الثقافية التي تواجههم.
Which they didn't, preferring to...
It said, quote, in its study, and today it's all about...
SBS on the Money with Ricardo Gonçalves.
Wait up, wasn't that in Arabic?
استمعوا الآن إلى الموسم الثاني من بودكاست.
So how are you going to...
The bloke or something. Anyway, the bloke, we still got problems with China and they still got problems with, a lot of problems with trucks. They're not getting the food. A lot of people didn't get to work. They didn't have they've been sacked. Food shortages in the shops. No food there. The shop, some parts are not there. Plenty of things are not there. Workers are not there. Things are collapsing or something. It's disgusting. A lot of protest in Canberra. The capital. I don't know why. It's crazy Australia now or something. It's because of this pandemic. Virus, kill the virus or something. Error, out there. Love you. I need sex. Out there. It's killing people. They're dying. Sport and everything. YouTube, black and welcome. Okay, everything going together. But why do you have less food in the shops? Why don't the trucks come in? What's going on with signing up and all this debate with borders, cyber attack, banks, jobs, work? Everybody's nasty, dirty tactics. They're talking about rap music, hip-hop music, Snoop Doggy Dogg. No, man, no one's... Nah! Everything's going nuts or something. Whoa, error, what? Australia's protesting a lot. They're doing heaps of crazy things. Love you, reply, fuck off, karate. Be nice to people, please, be nice. YouTube.
I think the market, though, is still expecting interest rates to rise this year anyway, and obviously it'll influence the way trade happens this year. So how are you going to navigate that in 2022, and just how do you see the interest rate story playing out?
Yeah, we are seeing reasons to maintain a cautious approach. While we don't see enough reason not to be invested in equity markets at the moment, equity markets are still supported by solid earnings growth. We're expecting 10% calendar year earnings growth here in Australia. The macros are still supporting equity markets, low unemployment rate, solid GDP growth rate. We do expect the technology sector to struggle in this increasing interest rate environment. While there is talk of 4 to 5 interest rate hikes, both here and in the US, it really could go either way. If inflation remains elevated, we could see more interest rates increase. If there's a bit of a levelling off of inflation, we could see fewer. So it's really important to remain nimble around that sort of interest rate strategy. We're sort of we've been progressively reducing our exposure to the tech sector. We believe the tech sector will struggle during these higher interest rate environment times, and we've been rotating into banks, which we feel will be supported in this current market environment. We've also been increasing our diversification of our portfolios across more asset classes.
We're in February. It's the first day of the month. The market was smashed in January, down 6.4% over the month. What's your take? I guess a lot of it has got to do about this interest rate talk, especially toward the end of the month when the market really went into free fall, when we learned that the US Federal Reserve was going to potentially start lifting interest rates from March, right? But the question is, was it oversold? And what happens now?
So Australian shares are about 8.2% off their highs. Similarly, the S&P 500 is down about 6.3% off their highs. We went into a technical correction last week.
Implies that interest rates there will start rising from March. And then we've got the Bank of England later this week, where there are great expectations that it'll start raising interest rates there.
I guess if you have a look at the unemployment rate in the United States, if you look at their wages growth, if you look at the inflation numbers, they're a lot higher than in Australia. So, for example, their headline CPI is over 7%. You know, ours is sitting at 3.5%. You have a look at their unemployment rate; it's already below 4%. We're at 4.2%, but heading down under there. And it's the same thing with the UK. Their inflation is higher. It's above 5% per annum, and their unemployment rate is lower than where it is in Australia. But, you know, when you look at the major economies around the world, they're still sort of moving in that same groove, which is inflationary pressures are building up, the unemployment rate is moving down, and wages growth is turning up.
Bessedetta there from St George, Chief Economist. Now, what does this all mean for shareholders? Well, the ASX rallied today after the RBA's decision. The 200 up 0.5%, 7,006, but it does follow a dreadful month for the share market. The ASX 200 down 6.4% in January. Today, of course, is the first day of February. So for more, I spoke earlier with Robert Telefsky. He is the Managing Director at Activist Investment Advisors. Robert, how did the market react to the RBA's board meeting today?
So all up, Australian shares edged higher, taking some lead from the US overnight on a day, as you say, where the RBA met to discuss monetary policy. We were expecting four things from today's RBA meeting. One was to, announcements around leaving interest rates on hold, which they did. Another was in relation to ending their bond buying program, which they also did. Also revising up their inflation forecasts, which they did. However, we were expecting a more hawkish stance from the RBA and basically bring forward their interest rate increases, which they didn't, preferring to take a more wait-and-see approach going forward.
I think the market, though, is still expecting interest rates to rise this year anyway, and obviously it'll influence the way trade happens this year. So how are you going to navigate that in 2022, and just how do you see the interest rate story playing out?
Yeah, we are seeing reasons to maintain a cautious approach, while we don't see enough reason not to be invested in equity markets at the moment. Equity markets are still supported by solid earnings growth. We're expecting 10% calendar year earnings growth here in Australia. The macros are still supporting equity markets, low unemployment rate, solid GDP growth rate. We do expect the technology sector to struggle in this increasing interest rate environment. While there is talk of 4 to 5 interest rate hikes, both here and in the US, it really could go either way. If inflation remains elevated, we could see more interest rates increase. If there's a bit of a levelling off of inflation, we could see fewer. So it's really important to remain nimble around that sort of interest rate strategy. We're sort of we've been progressively reducing our exposure to the tech sector. We believe the tech sector will struggle during these higher interest rate environment times, and we've been rotating into banks, which we feel will be supported in this current market environment. We've also been increasing our diversification of our portfolios across more asset classes.
We're in February. It's the first day of the month. The market was smashed in January, down 6.4% over the month. What's your take? I guess a lot of it has got to do about this interest rate talk, especially toward the end of the month when the market really went into free fall, when we learned that the US Federal Reserve was going to potentially start lifting interest rates from March, right? But the question is, was it oversold? And what happens now?
So Australian shares are about 8.2% off their highs. Similarly, the S&P 500 is down about 6.3% off their highs. We went into a technical correction last week. Technical correction is basically another word for, or defined as, a movement down of 10% or more. It's not driven by fundamental factors, factors such as obviously concerns around arising from spiking inflation, the anxiety of investors around the projection and the sort of increasing of interest rates going forward as well. And you can add to that the geopolitical risks around Russia and Ukraine. And as we've seen, Omicron cases increase dramatically as well, have all contributed to this market volatility and equity market downturn. We are starting to see some stability return in equity markets from obviously a poor January. We're not seeing the strong recoveries we saw following a market pullback, or pullbacks, I should say, in 2021. We still think that market volatility will stick around for the next 12 months going forward.
Robert Talevsky there from Activist Investment Advisors. Now, interest rates, of course, do have implications for the housing market, but until they rise, we are seeing prices to continuing to increase. CoreLogic today is saying that the national average increasing 1.1% in January for that month. The best performing capital city was Brisbane, up 2.3%. In fact, prices in Brisbane have risen nearly 30% over the past 12 months, making it the best performing capital city market over the past year. The worst performer over the past month was Melbourne, up by just 0.2%. But in this environment of potential rising interest rates this year, what happens? For that and more, I spoke earlier with CoreLogic's Tim Lawless. How would you describe the way house price growth started this year?
In many ways, we've seen the market start the year like it finished last year. Housing values nationally were up 1.1%. December, they're up 1%. So not much difference there at all. But we have actually seen more activity through January than we normally would. In fact, through January, we're estimating sales activity was about 30% higher than the 5-year average. Obviously pretty thin. December compared to January was down about 30% in total volumes. But we're still seeing quite a bit of activity in the marketplace, which really highlights that demand remains relatively strong.
How and when will we know the true momentum of the market?
Yeah, a great question. I think coming into February, we should get a much clearer reading on how the market's performing through early 2022. By then, we'll see transactional activity will have ramped up. We'll see a few weeks' worth of auction clearance rates. We'll start to get a better feel for what inventory levels are doing through the early part of the year as well. So at the moment, it looks like the market remains relatively strong compared to where it was in December, or similar to where it was in December. But remember, back in March of last year, we were seeing national housing values rising at nearly 3% month on month. And that's gradually wound down to around about 1% month on month. So the broader trend here is clearly one that is pointing to a slowdown or a softening.
A lot of talk about the potential for higher official interest rates this year, earlier than expected. We know that there's some movements when it comes to fixed rates from the banks as well. So to what extent do you think higher interest rates will take some of the heat out of home price growth, or do you think there are other variables?
Well, rates are definitely a factor in the housing market's outlook. And for previous analysis we've done, it shows a very high correlation between cash rate movements and housing values, their performance. In fact, it's about an 84% inverse relationship. But there is a bit of a lag to that. So 12 months down the track, you see that relationship becomes much stronger. So my view is, as we see interest rates starting to rise, clearly that's going to be some further downwards pressure on the housing market's performance. But the other factors you mentioned, things like credit availability, are equally as important. And if we do see further signs that credit could be tight.
Okay, I cut it out. Oopala, well. Anyway, a house costs like $2 million. It's high now to make. I saw a bloke saying, oh yeah, we're going to do, and it takes a long time for the workers and everyone refix roof. The roof of the house broke down the road because the tree fell over. On the other side, a branch was on one side of the road, and he jumped to something, and he went up, and the branch went like a bullet into the house, and he made a hole in it, and it's gonna. There's about 150 tiles that needs to be, and all these things. The carpenter is gonna be very nice. I am going red on the face now, and other entity like the bank loans, not that big. It's bit vile and silly, and it's disgusting. Anyway, and it's like a house, beautiful house, a lot of money. And buy a little shitty one, but you'll be living somewhere shitty. If you buy a better, like 900,000 to 1 million or 2 million, you will get somewhere beautiful, and beautiful people live there, and they're very, very staunch and upper class, and they're all beautiful. I love you, kind of thing. I am sorry. Okay, I'm going too far. Anyway, Australia is beautiful. It's just you gotta work. You gotta do your job. If you don't do anything and don't do what you can, what you got to do, fuck. Oh my God. Okay, I was gonna put this one on. Oopala, excuse me. Reply, combine. Out there, I love you. Out there, I love you. Sporty, please. You gotta be classy and posh and be outstanding to living a life in Australia or anywhere you want in Australia. You have to push yourself to get to where you want it. You don't just get there. Sorry, thank you. I love you, Sporty. I'm going to put this one on.
What happens when businesses make unlocking the power of their data and organizational...
You are trying to consistently reach new people, so voting period last time, 1,000 workers left in this 6,000 person facility, and there's only half of workers now eligible that were here for the last election. So turnover is a huge hurdle for the unions to particularly take on Amazon. And that's something that, even though in some ways hurts the company, certainly in keeping workers, when it comes to unions, it helps the company, because if you are trying to consistently reach new people, new voters, and trying to convince them, then it just becomes a humongous task to accomplish.
You can hear more from Sebastian in today's AM edition of our sister podcast, What's News. GameStop says it's partnering with Australian blockchain startup Immutable to launch an NFT marketplace later this year. The struggling video game retailer announced plans to get into NFTs and cryptocurrencies last month as part of its efforts to stage a comeback. The two companies also plan to create a fund of up to $100 million for developers to create NFTs for the marketplace that could be used in games. And
we have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1. We have booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour with the first American element of the International Space Station, uniting our efforts in space to achieve our common goal.
that sound is from 1998, when the Space Shuttle Endeavour blasted into orbit to begin assembling the International Space Station. For more than 30 years, the ISS helped NASA and others conduct cutting-edge research. But now the agency says it'll decommission the ISS within a decade.
What happens when businesses make unlocking the power of their data an organizational and cultural imperative? Find out in The Data Agenda, a new podcast series from Wall Street Journal Custom Content and Amazon Web Services, available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
This is your tech news briefing for Friday, February 4th. I'm Zoe Thomas for the Wall Street Journal. Investors are giving a serious thumbs down to Facebook. Shares of its parent company Meta fell 26% yesterday, their worst day on record, after the company released its latest earnings report showing slower than expected growth and a gloomy outlook for the next few years. But Meta's challenges and investors' concerns speak to bigger issues facing social media and the tech sector. On today's show, WSJ tech reporter Megan Boborowski joins us to unpack it all. That's after these headlines. Amazon managed to surprise investors with its latest earnings report. Revenue last quarter topped $137 billion, and the company made $14.3 billion in profit, almost double from a year earlier. Amazon's cloud computing and advertising businesses both grew, but it was the e-commerce giant's ability to control labor and supply costs during the holiday shopping season that stood out. Investors had worried supply chain disruptions and a return to in-person shopping would hurt the company's bottom line. Shares jumped more than 17% in after-hours trading. Meanwhile, starting today, Amazon workers at a warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama, will be deciding for a second time in a year on whether to unionize. You might remember that last April, about 71% of workers who voted there decided against joining a union. But the National Labor Relations Board called for a new election after finding that Amazon violated labor law in its campaign against unionization. Our Amazon reporter Sebastian Herrera says union organizers face the same challenge as last time.
The union estimated that during the course of voting period last time, 1,000 workers left in this 6,000 person facility. And there's only half of workers now eligible that were here for the last election. So turnover is a huge, huge hurdle for the unions to particularly take on Amazon. And that's something that, even though in some ways hurts the company, certainly in keeping workers, when it comes to unions, it helps the company because if you are trying to consistently reach new people, new voters, and trying to convince them, then it just becomes a humongous task to accomplish.
You can hear more from Sebastian in today's AM edition of our sister podcast, What's News. GameStop says it's partnering with Australian blockchain startup Immutable to launch an NFT marketplace later this year. The struggling video game retailer announced plans to get into NFTs and cryptocurrencies last month as part of its efforts to stage a comeback. The two companies also plan to create a fund of up to $100 million for developers to create NFTs for the marketplace that could be used in games. And
we have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1. We have booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour with the first American element of the International Space Station uniting our efforts in space to achieve our common goals.
That sound is from 1998, when the Space Shuttle Endeavour blasted into orbit to begin assembling the International Space Station. For more than 30 years, the ISS helped NASA and others conduct cutting-edge research. But now the agency says it'll decommission the ISS within a decade. NASA plans to take the ISS out of orbit in January 2031 and crash it into what's known as the Spacecraft Cemetery in the most remote part of the Pacific Ocean. From then on, NASA expects the private sector to pick up where the ISS left off. All right, coming up, what happens when you become less relevant to users and advertisers? Meta is finding out. We'll discuss after the break.
Not running your business on NetSuite is like trying to sink a putt with a cap over your eyes. NetSuite by Oracle is the #1 cloud financial system, giving you visibility and control over your financials, inventory, budgeting, and more. With NetSuite, you can automate your processes and close your books in no time while staying ahead of your competition. Over 27,000 businesses already use NetSuite. For the new year, NetSuite has a new financing program for those ready to upgrade at netsuite.com/Wall Street.
Facebook's parent company Meta is having a rough week. On Wednesday, it released its first earnings report since changing its name and its focus, leading shares to tumble the next day and wiping out more than $230 billion in market value. While the company wants its priority to be the future online realm known as the metaverse, it needs to make money in the real world, and its revenue still mostly comes from ad sales, and those are facing some serious headwinds. Joining us to unpack the challenges, investors' concerns, and Meta's future is our tech reporter, Megan Boborowski. Hi, Megan. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Zoe.
What were some of the most dramatic things to come out of Meta's earnings on Wednesday?
Yeah, so the biggest takeaways from Meta's earnings were that they lost 1 million users in the quarter, which is pretty significant for them because they don't typically lose users, and that they spent $10 billion developing the metaverse in 2021. They also projected that they are going to lose an additional $10 billion in 2022 because of Apple's policy changes that relate to whether you can track people. So all of this coupled together, I think, just really set off investors and analysts.
Losing 1 million daily active users, that's pretty massive. I mean, we know Facebook and Instagram are facing competition from other social media platforms. What did the company say it's trying to do to get them back?
Yeah, so Meta is facing a lot of competition from competitors like TikTok that have a younger audience. And so Meta is trying to attract this younger audience, right? And so they have their own TikTok competitor called Reels. It's short, choppy, like video segments, usually like 30 seconds. And so they're really pushing this more. And on the earnings call, they actually said, this is an area where we want to focus. But the problem that they're facing with Reels is that they can't monetize it as well as they can their traditional product. So you can have more users, or you can try to get more younger users, competing against TikTok and the other social media platforms. But if you're not able to monetize it, what's the point? If you win the war, but there's nothing left, there's no money, did you really win? So I think that's sort of the problem, and that's what analysts are saying, the problem that Meta is currently grappling with.
The other area that we know they're going to be focusing a lot on is the metaverse. And, there was a lot of attention and a lot of investment going into companies that focused on the metaverse. But it seems like Facebook talking about its reality labs and the big amount of money that it spent on that was a real shock to investors. Why?
Yeah, so the news that Facebook spent $10 billion on developing the metaverse in 2021 is not so much that the news was what upset people or what shocked people. It was more about all these other factors. The fact that they also said they're going to lose $10 billion in 2022 due to Apple's policy changes around tracking users. So you already are losing $10 billion from the metaverse at a time when you're also losing $10 billion from these new Apple policy changes. So you're down $20 billion when costs are, not expected to go down anytime soon. And so I think that's what really sort of freaked people out.
Yeah, I mean, those Apple policy changes, we've known they are happening. Apple announced them a while ago, but obviously this does seem to be a big impact.
Hey, I'm cutting it. Anyway, I was going to say something's going on. Okay, let's stop. Facebook is creating a lot of headaches because wherever Facebook in the website is, and you press it to share it or something, or to do, or the bottom is there, it can also track you if you went into there or whatever. It tracks in you. Who cares? Who knows? YouTube, everybody, copyright, things are going together. You know what I mean? I love it. We can share free social media, international computer network, metadata, and all this stuff that they got multi money making, and it's headaches. Too many things. Google's headache. It doesn't get all the searches properly, very, very bad, and discrimination, no love, nothing, no money, nothing. I'm gonna cut it. Love you. Out there. How do we cut it? Praise, everything going together. Name of God. Subscribe. Oops. Oh, I dropped the file.